Hey, well, good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Welcome to Real Life. We're so glad you're here. If you're wondering if you're late, no, we're just moving things around. You got to stay on your toes around here at Real Life. We keep you guessing. We are so excited about the fact that we're going to send hundreds of kids to camp here in just a few months. And I know some of you are so excited that we'll be sending your kids to camp. And you wish it was for a few months, but it's just for a few days. But we want to make sure every kid gets to go. And every year around here, you guys are so generous as to provide camp scholarships for kids. And so we've got a slide for that, a link where you can go and you can sign up to be able to sponsor kids, rlc.is/send-a-kid, and you can pay for a kid's tuition that way, or even if it's just partial tuition, anything is great. And you can also do that as you exit. There'll be some tables out there where you can do that. So that's a great opportunity for you to help out a lot of kids, and every year you guys do that. Hey, as Scott said, we are wrapping up our series called Anxious for Nothing today. And before I get to that, I want to tell you what we're going to do next week. And I'm so excited about this series. We've been working on it for months. But what we're going to do next week is we're going to kick off a brand new series just designed around these two words. In fact, let me show you these two words, and that is faith and belief. And for many of us, we grew up in a context where everybody said, you just got to have more faith. You just got to have faith. You got to have faith, faith, faith. You know, insert your own George Michael song there. Okay, so it was all about faith, right? And there were moments you thought, I'm not sure if I have enough faith. I'm not sure if I can do this. And what the difference is, there's a huge difference between the word faith and the word belief. And at the end of John's account of Jesus' life, and John was one of Jesus' closest friends, he wrote this sentence here: these things were written so you might believe. Not just have faith, but so that you might believe. And in his gospel, he gives us all these different signs that tell us this is a guy to believe in when it comes to Jesus. So, next week, we're going to kick off a 6-part series called Signs, and we're going to look at these various signs that tell us Jesus is more than someone just to have faith in and cross our fingers and hope for the best. He's someone to believe in. And if you've got a friend that has lots of questions about Jesus and whether or not to trust him, maybe you're right there right now. Maybe you feel like with your particular faith, you're getting ready to reach for the door and walk away because you don't have enough belief. This series is for you. At the end of the series, we're going to hear from J. Warner Wallace, who'll be with us, who's a former cold case investigator who was an atheist until he used his cold case abilities to research the resurrection and now is a follower of Jesus and speaks all over the place about that. And then the next weekend will be Easter, and we're going to have baptisms, and it's going to be just amazing. So that's all coming up in this next series. Make sure you're ready for that. But today, I get a chance to wrap up our series, Anxious for Nothing. And I got to be honest with you, this has been a really fun series. Now, it's not fun to deal with anxiety. It's fun to talk about anxiety because all of us deal with it in some kind of level. And I've been open with you about my struggles with anxiety as well. In fact, I just recorded a podcast that will come out in the next couple of weeks where I share something I've never shared with anybody before other than my wife when it comes to how I've handled anxiety and dealt with it. And I want to pass that on as a tool for you. And so maybe you might be interested in that. But we've been walking through this series, learning all these different things that help us when it comes to anxiety. Because the reality is, this is a staggering number, 31% of all adults will have some kind of anxiety disorder. Not just you got anxious, but anxiety disorder at some point in your life. I mean, this is not just general anxiety, but nearly 1/3 of all of us, of all of our friends, are going to have some kind of panic attack or anxiety disorder, or we're going to have it either now or we're going to have it in the future. And there's a lot of us that are feeling anxious and worried right now. In fact, as we've stated earlier in this series, we've talked about how in the United States alone, we have the highest rate of anxiety of any country in the world. Now, you would think that would be in another country that lives on like $2 a day, but no, it's in our country. In fact, what's interesting is sometimes when people move from other countries to our country, they have this panic attack because their anxiety goes up and they've never known that kind of level before. So the question is, why is that the case? I mean, some of us, we're recognizing we live in the most prosperous time ever, in the safest nation ever. Things have never been better than they are, but we're 3 times more anxious than the generation before us. How is that possible? Let me give you one word as to why that might be. Control. There's your third 80s song reference right there. Janet Jackson, Miss Jackson, everybody. Okay, no one else is getting this? Because I'm loving it. All right, anyway, faith, you got to have something to believe in, and now control. All right, so for many of us, the issue of control is that we feel like we've got to have control, and now that we live in such a time when we've got so much control over things, whether it's safety or our health or just the way we live our lives, when we feel like we're out of control, we absolutely lose it with anxiety. In fact, a German psychologist recently discovered that 1 hour in traffic, in intense traffic, and get this, will increase the odds of a heart attack by 3 times. Okay? Now think about that for just a second. Now why is that? It's not just because somebody's in your way. It's because you're paying attention, but you can be the best driver since Ricky Bobby, and the person next to you is on their phone, and you're like, oh, slow down, and you just know a wreck is coming. So here's what's really sobering for some of us. If you're traveling 2 hours in traffic because you're stuck on the 405 or the 101, that means it's 6 times more likely you're going to have a heart attack. Okay? And then if you're eating Jack in the Box at the same time, I mean, you got about 15 minutes to live. That's really about all there is. Now, what's interesting is if you eat Chick-fil-A, it actually adds years to your life. That's just another, that's free advice. Okay, that's Christian chicken. Anyway, now here's the thing. You never heard that? All right, here's the thing about anxiety. I mean, all of us deal with it. And for many of us, it's a perceived lack of control. When we live in an era when we feel like we should have control, when we don't, we lose it. Can I just tell you, and I think this series has shown us, we're not alone. We all wrestle with this. And so my prayer for you and for all of us is that we get help. Some of you need to see a doctor. You really do. For some, you might need to see a Christian counselor. For some, you just might need to talk to somebody about it. We have a lot of different resources at this site, rlcm.is/anxiety, that provide a lot of opportunities and things that we can provide for you to help you with your anxiety. We recognize just because the series ends doesn't mean we stop dealing with anxiety. But here's what we've been talking about through this whole series. Let me put this slide up here next. While the presence of anxiety is unavoidable, we're all going to have moments where we're anxious. The prison of anxiety is optional. You and I don't have to live in that prison. And I think that's been the hope for a lot of us through this series. We don't want to live this way anymore. We've been talking about this whole idea of anxious for nothing, but just fill in this blank for yourself. Anxious for, what is that for you? Is it your job? Is it your kids? Is it your health? Is it money? Here's our goal, to fill it in with the word nothing. So here's what we've been doing. We've been looking at the most highlighted passage in the Bible. We've been looking at this passage that was written in the 1st century by a guy by the name of Paul, that we refer to as Apostle Paul, and you might have grown up hearing him as St. Paul, but this guy wrote this passage when it came to anxiety. He says, I want you to rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, because some of you already stopped believing in it. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now look at the result of this. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This passage has been really what we've been digging into over the past few weeks. Hopefully by now you've got it memorized. If not, there's some cards you can pick up as you leave. Also some text reminders on the back where you can send in your prayer requests. But we've been using this passage and walking through it with this acronym of the word calm. And calm simply stands for, the letter C is celebrate. Rejoice in the Lord always. See what God has done and rejoice in it. Celebrate what God has done. The letter A was to ask God for help, to get specific with your prayers as to what you were asking Him to do as a way to lower your anxiety. Last week, we talked about the letter L, which is to list the things that you are thankful for or grateful for in your life, that God has done, that is going on. It lowers your anxiety. Gratitude and anxiety cannot live in the same brain. Only one can. So choose gratitude. And today we're going to wrap it all up with the letter M, which is to meditate. Now, I know when I say this, some of you are like, oh, good, I do this all the time. And some of you are like, oh, no, this is where it gets weird. Okay? So everybody put your arms out. I'm kidding. Now, here's where we get kind of freaked out because you've seen weird things go on. You've heard about Eastern religions that use this. But what I want to talk about is what Paul is talking about in this passage when it comes to his approach to meditation. And it might be totally different than what you have learned maybe growing up or in recent days. Now, quick reminder, where is Paul when he's writing this passage about be anxious for nothing? He's in prison. Not only is he in prison, but he's also dealing with some health problems. We know his vision is bad. He's been beaten by Roman soldiers over and over again. He's probably around the age of 60, which was about the life expectancy back then. Life is coming to an end for him, probably by execution in his mind, and eventually it would be by that. And he's writing these words, and he should have been writing, my life is awful. This really stinks. I don't know how I'm going to go on. But instead he writes about joy. Instead he writes about being anxious for nothing. And now he moves on to this idea of what it is to meditate upon. Take a look at what he says in the next passage. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right or pure or lovely or admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Now, let's just stop right there. Think about this phrase here. Think about such things. This phrase in the Greek language is the same makeup of words where we get our word logic from. Paul is saying, let's think logically about this. Now, let me just have a brief moment of biology for a second, okay? Now, just give me a little bit of grace. I did not major in this, all right? But this is what I have researched and found out, and I think many of you have heard some of this as well. Neurologists tell us that there are different parts of our brain that are responsible for different things. Let's put the picture up of the brain, okay? So here's the brain, and in the brain, there is this spot that's called the amygdala, okay? We're going to light that up. There it is. You probably thought it was right there. And the amygdala is really kind of responsible. It's like an alarm system. If you've got a, ADT at the house and somebody opens the door, it just goes off. It doesn't say, is this friend or foe? Is this a family member? It just goes off. And that's what the amygdala does. It just reacts when something scary happens. And it causes you to jump into what's known as the fight or flight syndrome, all right? Now, here's the thing about the amygdala. It also reports to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is what brings about the logic in your brain. So that the amygdala says, oh, we're scared. And the prefrontal cortex says, calm down, it's nothing. Okay, you see how that works? Now, here's what's interesting. Do you know at what age the prefrontal cortex becomes fully developed in our bodies? 25. Which means when you are arguing with your 16-year-old daughter about why she is so upset about whatever it is, and you say to her, you're not listening to reason. They're unable to, okay? Just FYI. And God bless them, but God bless you more, okay? Because, and I'm living it, friends. I'm living it. Boy, am I living it. All right. A 17 and a 15-year-old. All right, so anyway, It's not developed yet. They don't have that ability. Now, here's a great example of how that works. You, as a over 25-year-old, decide to go to Fright Fest over at Magic Mountain, and you're rolling through there, and somebody jumps out in a hockey mask and a chainsaw, and your amygdala says, oh my goodness, we're all going to die. But then your prefrontal cortex kicks in and goes, oh, wait a second, I paid money for this, and I know that kid, he lives on the street from me. So you begin to calm down a little bit, right? That's the thing about how our brain works. Okay, we can lose the picture of the brain. Now, here's how this impacts us when it comes to anxiety. The problem with anxiety is it's what we imagine to happen. The amygdala fires up on what we fear might happen. It hasn't even happened yet. But we are telling ourselves and talking ourselves into the fact that it will. I heard this story about this woman who was really anxious about somebody breaking into the house. And so she was always telling her husband, you know what, you got to arm the house, you got to lock all the doors. So he did. He bought a security system, locked all the doors. Every night he'd come to bed, she'd say, go check the alarm, go check the doors again. So he would, constantly surveying the house. One night, she wakes him up, she said, I heard something downstairs. He goes downstairs, sure enough, someone's broken in the house. And he says, thank God you're here. Would you come up and meet my wife? She has been waiting for you for 10 years, okay? Thank you. All right. That is a total, illustration of our imagination going wild. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with you and I. Our brains are just like any muscle in our body. If you don't use them the right way, they atrophy. And when you constantly are imagining the worst that can happen, you are developing a path away from the prefrontal cortex, and you're not using reason. Scientists will tell you that. Meditation is to sit still long enough and focus on what is true so that you rewire that pathway and you can actually begin to think logically when it comes to your anxiety. This is what Paul is telling us. We need to think about what we think about because not every thought is worth thinking about. Because if you just let your mind run wild, it will take you in a place you do not want to go, and it will take you away from that part of your brain God has given you to help you reason the right way. So, what are we supposed to think about? And Paul says, I'm glad you asked. Let's review that verse again. Whatever is true. In other words, this thing that you're focusing on, is it even possible? Is it even true? Probably not. Think about the amount of worry and stress we have about what we think somebody might be thinking about us right now. And odds are they're probably not thinking about you at all. But we think they might be. And that's not true. Whatever is noble, whatever is good, whatever is right, in other words, what Jesus said, the teachings of Jesus, whatever is pure. In other words, there's no contamination. You know what contamination is in our mind? Gossip, bitterness, envy, jealousy. Just don't bother with that. Don't think on those things. He continues on. Whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. It's this idea of all these things we talked about last week, these things we thank God for. He says, I want you to think on these things. I want you to let your mind dwell on these things. That is how you meditate. It looks a little bit like this. Imagine this is your mind, okay? And your mind is just kind of, you wake up in the morning and that you have that brief moment in the morning where everything is bliss. And it takes about 5 seconds before you figure out what it is you were worried about the day before, right? And what happens is slowly our red-hot, anxious thoughts begin to fill our brain. Uh-oh, what's going to happen? Well, what if this doesn't work out? And what if they don't show up? What if she leaves me? What if she stays? What if all these things go wrong in my life? And it just begins to fill up our brain over and over and over again. Now, meditation is where we stop and we get rid of those things. We finally decide, you know what? Those things aren't accurate. And I'm going to concentrate on other things. And this is where Eastern religion meditation basically says just empty your mind of those things. But here's the problem. if that's all you do, they're just going to come right back in. And that's why Paul says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about things that are true, that are noble, that are lovely, that are good, that are excellent, that are praiseworthy, that list of things we're thankful for. I want you to meditate on the words of God. I want you to think about those songs that we sing. I want you to make this part of your mind, and I want you to let it overtake your thoughts. Because when you do that, then you don't have room for this. The struggle that you and I have is that we begin to live with emptiness in our mind, and it just gets filled up again with anxiety. In fact, Paul will go on to give us this great passage. Let's take a look at this next verse here. He says, you know what we do? We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take captive every thought. This is a guy that's in prison, chained to a guard, waiting to be executed. You don't think he deals with tendency to be anxious? He says, every thought that comes into my head, I take it captive, and I figure out which vase does it go in. Then I deal with it. So how are we going to do this? I want to give you two things that will help you. Two things that have helped me, and two things you can do with your family. You know who's struggling with this the most? It's our kids. They don't have the logical part of their brain. We laugh about it, but they're defenseless. When they think about what is true, they don't know. They need us to speak the truth to them and to fill up their minds with the right things. This is why we're so big on you bringing your kids to church, because it gives them another opportunity to fill their brain with things that are good instead of just all the things that bring anxiety. So I want to give you two things that will help you. Two things that have helped me. The first thing is this. What are my anxious thoughts that I need to empty? For many of us, it's a whole list of what ifs. What if it breaks? What if they leave? What if they never come back? What if my health never gets better? On and on and on. Write it down. Get it out of your brain. And then throw it away. And then finally, the second question is this. What thoughts do I need to fill my mind with? This is when we do what Paul said. We take captive every thought. And those thoughts that come in, we weigh them, because we can do that because of the logical part of our brain. We say, is this true? Is this noble? Is this good? Is this right? Is this pure? Because if it's not, then I'm not going to think on those things. I'm not going to meditate on those things. I'm going to focus my mind on something else. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to ask God for help, and I'm going to list what God has done. A couple years ago, I was going through a kind of a small bout of anxiety, and a friend gave me a book. It was just so helpful. And it was all about the Lord's, or the shepherd's prayer in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. It was such an unbelievable passage and just unpacked in this book. And I just started praying this prayer over and over again. And it really just starts off like this. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. And that may not be all that I want, but it's all that I need. And letting that rest in my mind filled my mind up with the right things. That God provides everything that I need because God is like a shepherd to me who cares for his sheep. If I'm ever afraid that I don't have enough, God is my shepherd and he gives me what I need. But then later on, David writes this passage in there. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Even when times are scary, even when the health report is not good, even when we're at a graveside, even when they don't come back, even when we're unemployed, I will not be afraid because you are with me. And God with me is bigger than anything that I'm facing in my life. So let me ask you, what are you facing right now? What are you anxious for right now? What are you scared about right now? What consumes your thoughts so that you look so much more like this and not like this? I want you to reach into that place where you're no longer anxious for those things, but you find that anxiety is not a prison for you anymore. You can be anxious for nothing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take some time to let our minds rest on those things. And I want to invite you right now, if you would just put both feet on the floor, sit up in your chair, take a deep breath, maybe put your hands on your knees, and just take a deep exhale. And let me pray for you. God, we come in here today, some of us feeling the weight of the world, overwhelmed by so much stuff. We can't even keep it all straight in our heads. And the best we can do at the end of the day is distract ourselves with TV or videos or maybe even substances. God, the idea of being quiet before you kind of scares us to death. But as Paul has said, may we rejoice that the Lord is near. And so God, right now, would you quiet our souls? Would you quiet our minds? Would you help us to empty out those negative thoughts so we can receive what is true, what is right, and what is good, and what is pure, and what is lovely, and what is noble, what is excellent and praiseworthy. God, we want to think on those things for these next few moments. Let your words speak to us right now, God. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name.